Okay, everybody? Are we all good? Can we start? Oops. So good afternoon. My name is Michel Forst, and I am the United Nations Special Rapporteur on environmental justice, environmental defenders, a position which has been created recently under the Aarhus Convention, and my role is to protect defenders, also to promote their participation into international fora. So I'm very happy to moderate this panel discussion and to welcome all participants to this event around the broad issue of land environment defenders advancing climate justice. You all have your headsets. I don't have the numbers, but you know how it works. We have English, Spanish, and Arabic translation. This event is organized by a large group of organizations, and we will have time to go to the names of all organizations. I would take the risk to miss some of the names. Just a few words to remind us on the context of this event, which is more than welcome. It's a sort of continuation of events that took place at several occasions at Bonn climate change conferences and also at the Action for Climate Empowerment negotiations for the Action Plan on Climate Assemblies, CLIMAS, and is related to the right to participation, including in decision-making, right to access to information, right to deliberation, right to freedom of expression, association, and assembly. And so critical for democracy and also for effective efforts to mitigate the climate crisis and advance climate justice. Just a few words on the format of the discussion. We'll start with two opening remarks, and then we'll have a panel discussion with plenty of time for you to ask questions and to give your say to the statements provided by the panelists. And now I will give the floor to our distinguished speaker, Rosilea Kaigang. She is the National Secretary for Articulation and Promotion of Indigenous Peoples' Rights from Brazil. You have the floor, Madam Ambassador. I said ambassador, it's minister, in fact.
Bem, boa tarde a todas e todos, especialmente as mulheres e as mulheres indígenas. Eu agradeço o excelentíssimo senhor Michael Forst, relator especial da ONU para Defensores Ambientais, e gostaria de cumprimentar, em nome de toda a mesa, a minha parenta, Chay Suruí, mulher indígena do Brasil. Bem, eu agradeço o convite também da Global Witness e da Natural Justice e demais organizadores desse painel. É uma honra participar desse evento com todas e todos vocês, e especialmente um momento muito especial da COP28, em que nós do Brasil temos aí a expectativa e a intenção de organizar a COP30. Então, este é um momento de muitos diálogos e esperamos que em 2025 nós possamos receber vocês no Brasil, como o governo árabe também tem recebido nós aqui neste espaço. Nós, no Brasil, atualmente, somos em torno de 1.693.535 pessoas indígenas. Esse é um número muito importante porque vem de dados do Instituto Brasileiro de Geografia e Estatística, que no ano de 2010 contabilizou em torno de 50% deste número populacional. Mas mais importante do que dizer o número total de pessoas indígenas no Brasil hoje é dizer que 50% desta população são mulheres e meninas indígenas. Os nossos dados dos povos indígenas do Brasil também reconhecem 305 povos indígenas e uma diversidade multilinguista de mais de 274 línguas diferentes faladas pelos povos indígenas. Eu faço parte do Ministério dos Povos Indígenas, que é um ministério inédito, criado em 1º de janeiro de 2023, pelo presidente Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, durante a sua posse, e que foi um compromisso assumido pelo atual presidente com os povos indígenas do Brasil. No Ministério dos Povos Indígenas, que atualmente está sendo capitaneado pela nossa ministra Sônia Guajajara, também uma mulher indígena, que tem feito um diálogo com os 36 outros ministérios do governo brasileiro, dos quais nós destacamos um diálogo constante com o Ministério do Meio Ambiente e Mudança do Clima e das Mulheres, e nós, na secretaria onde eu estou trabalhando, atuando, enquanto secretária de Estado, nós temos dialogado de forma muito presente com o Ministério da Mulher, construindo um projeto que nós pensamos e temos aí como intenção de tornar um programa de Estado chamado Mulheres Guardiãs. É um projeto pensado para mulheres indígenas, reconhecidas como defensoras da vida, e este projeto é de combate à violência contra as mulheres indígenas, mas é especialmente de fortalecimento das capacidades das mulheres indígenas. A perspectiva desta construção, ela é para pensar políticas públicas voltadas para as mulheres indígenas, tendo como premissa a consulta prévia, livre e informada. Um outro ponto importante para compartilhar com vocês nessa tarde é que o Ministério dos Povos Indígenas tem apoiado as discussões sobre o Acordo de Escazú, especialmente no objetivo que trata dos defensores e das defensoras dos direitos ambientais, assumindo que as mulheres indígenas estão nessa posição, sendo guardiãs das florestas e das águas. Nós, mulheres indígenas, temos uma sabedoria ancestral, inspirada pela nossa ancestralidade, e nós temos trazido ao debate novos termos e conceitos. Um deles é o reflorestar mentes, reflorestar os pensamentos, que é, sim, um conceito muito novo para a humanidade, numa perspectiva de mudanças de hábitos nocivos, do desmatamento, do uso irregular e abusivo dos recursos naturais. E a nossa proposta, enquanto mulheres indígenas, é tornar possível a continuidade da vida humana com qualidade de vida, com segurança alimentar, com segurança ambiental e com a sabedoria do bem viver indígena. Neste ano, o mundo bateu muitos recordes de temperaturas em vários lugares e nós precisamos reduzir urgentemente as emissões de carbono no mundo. Não podemos ousar ultrapassar 1,5 graus, porque já estamos sentindo os impactos nocivos. Se os países não fizerem mais e mais rápido, todos nós vamos sofrer. Mas as mulheres sofrerão ainda mais, porque nós, mulheres, estamos relegadas às periferias sociais e somos as mais impactadas. E no primeiro semestre desse ano, o Brasil viveu grandes extremos, impacto das mudanças climáticas. Nós tivemos seca no sul do Brasil, que impactou os povos indígenas de modo muito especial na agricultura, nos territórios. E na região norte, nós tivemos um aumento pluviométrico significativo. As chuvas foram intensas e impactou várias comunidades. Já nesse segundo semestre do ano, nós tivemos várias inundações na região sul do Brasil, várias tempestades e uma seca muito grande no bioma amazônico, expondo a nossa vulnerabilidade em relação às mudanças climáticas, que impacta a vida. A falta de água potável é um dos grandes impactos, mas impacta a nossa saúde de modo geral, a produção de alimentos que foram perdidos nas lavouras, impacta a soberania alimentar que foi comprometida e impacta também a bioeconomia, que sofre com a alteração da matéria-prima. A seca do rio impactou o transporte, que é feito exclusivamente por estes rios na região amazônica, ocorrendo o desabastecimento de alimentos, de remédio, de assistência à saúde para as pessoas. Os territórios indígenas, eles representam no mundo cerca de 80% da biodiversidade protegida no planeta. E nós, povos indígenas, somos apenas 5% da população mundial. Mas tem uma justificativa para isso. É porque o nosso modo de vida está adaptado e conectado econômica e culturalmente à proteção da biodiversidade. Mas é fato que os interesses econômicos, eles são muitos, e em boa parte do planeta, e no Brasil não é diferente, esses interesses econômicos incentivam atividades criminosas, desde o desmatamento ao garimpo ilegal, que tem avançado sobre as florestas, mas sobre os nossos territórios também. E são as mulheres indígenas que, mesmo enfrentando a crise climática, enfrentando o desmatamento, enfrentando o garimpo ilegal, têm manejado os seus territórios numa perspectiva de garantia de vida. Porque as mulheres indígenas são agricultoras e são as guardiãs das sementes e têm sofrido com as mudanças, mas elas também são coletoras, são mulheres trabalhadoras que respeitam a floresta. Embora nós, mulheres indígenas, utilizemos a floresta e os seus recursos naturais, nós fazemos com cuidado, coletamos e colhemos o que nos é permitido. E nós temos boas práticas que já foram identificadas por pesquisas, porque nós, povos indígenas, temos um compromisso com a floresta. A conservação ambiental é uma das estratégias de ocupação territorial dos povos indígenas. E isso ajuda a ampliar tanto a diversidade da flora, quanto os manejos sustentáveis dos territórios. E muitas plantas, é importante falar isso, salientando que nós, povos indígenas, somos cientistas, sim, muitas plantas, muitos alimentos surgiram como técnicas de manejo da floresta. Os saberes das mulheres indígenas estão atrelados ao cuidado dos territórios. Por isso, nós temos nos identificado como mulheres biomas. Nós fizemos parte, concebidas e conectadas como corpus território. O território nos pertence e nós pertencemos a ele. Tendo o nosso trabalho diário baseado na sabedoria ancestral, associada às técnicas milenares. Durante muito tempo, nós, povos indígenas, estivemos na borda periférica do debate. Hoje nós estamos aqui, debatendo, corpos presentes nesses espaços, atualmente ocupando e alterando as compreensões sobre as nossas ciências, porque somos nós que estamos falando e dizendo que nós somos doutores nas nossas ciências, participando ativamente de pesquisas e demonstrando que nós somos responsáveis por frear o aquecimento global. As mulheres e meninas indígenas têm trabalhado diariamente numa perspectiva de defensoras ambientais, mas de defensoras da vida. E é importante ressaltar essa COP28 como uma COP que pode ser histórica, considerando as nossas vozes das mulheres indígenas, a nossa participação efetiva nesses lugares. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, Zila, for your kind words of welcome and also for the recognition of Brazil being the next host of the COP30 with an inclusive invitation to all defenders to participate into the whole processes. I'm now pleased to introduce my friend, Shruti Suresh. She's a lawyer, and she's the co-director of campaigns at Global Witness, where she's leading the critical work to shift the balance of power towards people and community impacted by climate crisis. And today, Shruti will present Global Witness data on attacks against land and environmental defenders. Shruti, you have the floor. It's up to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Michelle. Anna Yanomami Sesena, Edgar Quintero, Narendra Balia, Mohammad Mehdi Kengu, Rose Marie Galias. These are few of the names of 177 land and environmental defenders killed last year. Quinto Inuma Alvarado, Higinio Trinidad de la Cruz, indigenous leaders fighting unsustainable mining and deforestation killed last week. Over the past decade, Global Witness has been monitoring killings of land and environmental defenders globally. These are brave men and women being killed because they speak truth to power. They resist. They stand up for their rights. Our data shows that on average, a land and environmental defender is killed every other day. And this has been happening for the past 11 years. At minimum, we believe that at least 1,910 defenders have been killed during this period. This data is the tip of the iceberg. Because of underreporting and other challenges we face with collection of information, the sad truth is that the situation on the ground is far worse than what the numbers show us. Moreover, whilst killings represent the most egregious forms of attacks against defenders, this is not where it ends. Unfortunately, defenders are being subject to a whole suite of non-lethal attacks. The Allied Network, the Alliance of Environmental Defenders and civil society organizations all around the world supporting defenders, has found that there's a rising trend of non-lethal attacks. So we're talking here about violence, harassment, digital threats, and criminalization. What we're seeing is this is not ending with killings. There's a whole suite of attacks to crush and silence defenders. Businesses play an outsized role in fueling attacks. Global Witness investigations have documented attacks against defenders at the hands of agribusiness, fossil fuel, and mining companies, including mining of transition minerals, so essential for the rapid expansion of renewable energy that we're seeing to come in the next few years. Yet, the law is not being used to hold these companies accountable. The very legal system that is meant to be protecting defenders is actually being used to silence them. We are seeing this in the form of arrests of defenders under spurious grounds and laws being passed to silence defenders in almost every region of the world. Be that in Vietnam, where we know of climate defenders and energy activists who are currently, as we speak, languishing in prison, or in my home country, India, the so-called largest democracy in the world, where laws are being used, be that tax evasion, cybercrime, sedition, you name it, these laws are being used to crush what was traditionally a very activist civil society. Given this dire global outlook, I am extremely grateful, and on behalf of all of the organizers of this event, Madam Kang Nang, National Secretary of the Government of Brazil, we are really grateful and inspired by the comments you've offered today and your commitment to protect indigenous communities and defenders in Brazil. This is particularly important as we know that there is a high risk for defenders in the Amazon region. Last year, we know that 39 defenders were killed in the rainforest, and this includes a significant proportion of indigenous communities. So we look forward to working with you, Madam National Secretary, and the government of Brazil in the run-up to COP30 in 2025, the Amazonian COP, if you were, to making that a success and to really accelerating international action that is so direly needed for environmental defenders globally. But coming back here to Dubai, what can COP28 do for environmental defenders? As we speak, there are negotiations taking place on the global stocktake. This is a stock-taking process looking at the progress made in implementing the Paris Agreement. This offers us a critical opportunity to set the tone, to set the ambition for the next 5 years. This is a great opportunity for us to call for transformational system change based on justice, equity, and human rights in what is the critical decade of climate action. If we don't get it right now, we're not going to get it right later. So we need every party negotiating in B1 in the negotiating rooms to really push for strong language that explicitly recognizes participation and protection of environmental defenders at every level of climate decision-making, at the national, regional, and international level. And we need to see this happen by next week. So if there's one thing you can do, push your governments to call for this text. Lip service to human rights is something that we see every single climate COP doing, and we cannot tolerate that anymore. We need every single government, every business, every financial development institute, and donors to recognize that to achieve climate justice, we need to ensure that our frontline defenders are able to safely and meaningfully participate in climate decision-making. If we need to usher in a just energy transition, we need to ensure that defenders, people, and communities are at the heart of climate solutions. So one other thing that everyone in this room can do is to join us in our call for action with our demands that we are presenting to governments world over. You should be able to see the QR code on the screen here, so please use your phones, scan the QR code, and sign on to our petition. And so that's one thing each one of you in this room can do. So join us as we defend the defenders. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shruti, for your explanations and your words. We are now going to start with the panel discussion, and I will explain to you how it would work, in fact. We'll have 50 minutes, in short, with 2 rounds of questions to panelists, followed by a small session of question and answer by the audience. So plenty of time to reflect on your expectations to the panelists. And I will start by briefly introducing our 4 panelists. Starting with Ksai Surui. You're from Brazil. She is a member of the Paita Surui indigenous community in Brazil. Ksai is an activist, a land defender, advocate for indigenous people's rights. She's the founder of the movement of indigenous youth of Rondônia and the coordinator of the Associação de Defesa Etnoambiental Canindé, which is a community organization that I worked with indigenous peoples over 30 years. Welcome to this panel. Infiltration by the police, or that's you? Okay. Second panelist, we have Leah Torres from the Philippines. She's the director of CEC Philippines, an NGO that focuses on environmental research, education, advocacy, and campaigning. CEC also serves as the secretariat of APNED, which is the Asia-Pacific Network of Environment Defenders. Welcome. We have now also from Mexico, Alma Xochitl Zamora Mendez, journalist and indigenous activist. She coordinated projects to promote community development through traveling cinema with indigenous youth, as well as self-managed processes for indigenous communities to develop food sovereignty, cooperativism, traditional medicine, gender equality, and community theater. Welcome, Alma. And then we have the last speaker, Mika Bigwind Carpenter-Lott from the USA. Mika was born in Great Falls, Montana, and they become involved in civic engagement and youth leadership at the age of 13, where the local county was found guilty of diluting indigenous votes. Since then, they have worked on a number of campaigns throughout Indian County and Turtle Islands. In August 2016, they headed out to the Standing Rock Reservation to help families, friends, and historical allies in several months-long multifaceted direct action campaigns against the Dakota Access Pipeline, the APL. And in 2017, they helped to create an indigenous-led youth contingent in Massachusetts, and they have been involved in several campaigns against all pipelines affecting indigenous peoples and territories. Thank you to the four of you to being there, and welcome. I will start. We have decided not to give the floor to the panelists to introduction remarks, but to ask them to respond to questions that they have prepared well in advance. Starting with Sai. Sai, you're from Brazil, and the Brazilian Supreme Court has rejected the controversial Marco Temporal Doctrine in historic victory for indigenous rights. In your opinion and perspective, is that a victory for indigenous peoples and land and defenders? And what is the situation for them in Brazil at the moment? You have the floor for like 3-5 minutes.
Canatenga, boa tarde a todos. Primeiramente, gostaria de agradecer o convite por estar aqui, compartilhando um pouco da realidade dos povos indígenas do Brasil. Apesar dessa nova perspectiva de governo, com um novo ministério, os povos indígenas do Brasil ainda estão sob muito ataque, sob muita ameaça, principalmente pelo Congresso Nacional. Nós tivemos a decisão da Suprema Corte que determinou que essa tese, que é a tese do marco temporal, que coloca um limite temporal na demarcação dos nossos territórios, sem levar em consideração que o Brasil é terra indígena, que nós estávamos lá antes da invasão, a Suprema Corte determinou que essa tese inconstitucional. Ainda assim, o Congresso Nacional, com a sua maioria de deputados da bancada ruralista, inconformados com essa decisão, decidiram continuar com esse projeto de morte, que não traz somente a tese do marco temporal, mas que traz ainda outras coisas tão ruins quanto, como afastar a 8169, que fala do nosso consentimento livre, prévio e informado, como colocar em ameaça também os povos indígenas que estão em isolamento voluntário, como permitir a exploração do minério dentro dos nossos territórios, enfim, colocando em risco a vida de todos. E é importante dizer que esse tipo de projeto ele não coloca em risco somente a vida dos povos indígenas do Brasil, mas ele coloca em risco toda a vida na terra. Como a minha parente Josi falou, os povos indígenas são os maiores protetores da floresta, somos nós os guardiões da vida, porque se você pegar qualquer mapa satelital, você vai ver que hoje no Brasil a floresta é viva, a floresta em pé, onde há a presença dos povos indígenas, sejam os territórios demarcados ou não. Então, para que a gente tenha a segurança, para que a gente consiga superar essa maior crise que a humanidade está sofrendo, nós precisamos entender que nós precisamos assegurar que a proteção dos nossos territórios, nós precisamos assegurar a demarcação dos nossos territórios, nós precisamos assegurar a vida dos defensores indígenas, que ainda correm perigo. Nesse ano, a gente teve um líder indígena do povo Arara assassinado 2 semanas depois de denunciar a situação do seu território nas Nações Unidas. Então, a gente ainda não está seguro, a gente ainda precisa de muita proteção. E diante dessa nova perspectiva, a bancada ruralista, como eu falei, nos ataca ainda mais, e ataca ainda mais os nossos direitos. Mas, como eu disse, aquilo que o Congresso brasileiro decide vai afetar não só a nossa vida, mas a vida também de cada um de vocês. Nós somos 5% da população mundial e protegemos 80% de todas as florestas, de toda a biodiversidade, né? Então, o marco temporal, ele é um ataque à vida de cada um de vocês também. E é por isso, né, que eu faço esse chamado para que nós se unimos, lutemos juntos, possamos pressionar os deputados, né, e o governo brasileiro para que esse tipo de projeto não passe, né? Enquanto a gente está aqui, eles estavam tentando votar, né, para esse projeto. Enquanto as lideranças indígenas estão aqui, enquanto o governo brasileiro está aqui, né? Mas a gente conseguiu fazer com que, enfim, isso fosse adiado. Mas a gente ainda tem uma batalha muito grande pela frente, né, para segurar a nossa vida, né? As terras indígenas são uma das soluções para que a gente possa combater a crise climática, né? A sabedoria ancestral é uma das soluções para que a gente possa combater a crise climática. A gente não precisa construir mais novas tecnologias. Essas tecnologias, elas já existem, já estão sendo colocadas em práticas dentro dos territórios indígenas. Então, o que a gente precisa é assegurar que quem está na linha de frente dessa batalha continue vivo, é assegurar, né, que a nossa floresta continue de pé. Obrigada.
Thank you very much, Xai. Turning now to Leah from the Philippines. How has the vilification and other attacks on environmental defenders affect their participation in climate action?
Thank you. So in many intergovernmental spaces such as this COP, you always hear the words participatory, civil society representation, but how can climate activists or environmental defenders participate in these spaces if they are vilified or demonized? And this can be seen concretely in the practice of red tagging or terror tagging of environmental defenders. These are strategies of governments, and these are ways to repress people to make them stop speaking out about human rights violations. Just weeks before we came here in India, there has been a case of 21 local community members who has been opposing a series of large companies trying to mine their area. They have been protesting for 250 days, but then they were arrested and they were called like Maoists, terrorists, and they were filed with cases saying that they tried to harm the policemen. So they are using the justification that they are linked to certain armed groups just to say that this is okay for them, for the police to arrest them. They didn't even hear out the local communities. What are their concerns about these mining operations? They were arrested right away. And also last October in the Philippines, there were two young women activists, only 21 and 22 years old. They were abducted. They were currently that time they were trying to raise funds for the victims of the previous typhoons, and they were opposing a land reclamation project that would clear out mangrove forests and make their communities more vulnerable to flooding and sea level rise. They were taken from the home that they were staying in. Only their slippers were left behind. And we tried to look for them, but they were surfaced 2 weeks later by the military. They were presented in a press conference as rebel surrenderies. But these brave women, even at the presence of the military, they said that they were abducted and they were not rebels, they were activists. And this really proved the point that it is the military and the government would go to such lengths just to make sure that they really ensure that these people admit themselves that they're rebels. So after 2 weeks of psychological torture, the women still were able to assert their legitimacy as activists. And I think this is a very good example of how we can say that environmental defenders and land defenders are brave enough to assert their rights because they know what is really right or good for their communities. So with these two examples, we can see that these are not just isolated cases. These are happening in many parts of the world where governments would really vilify people just to justify their repression to these people. So we should assert that despite the beliefs of the people, despite their associations to various organizations, they have the right to due process. And they have the right to defend their communities from environmental destruction. And we can see also that these vilification tactics are meant to isolate environmental defenders. So when they are vilified, when they're called terrorists and communists, people will be afraid to support them. So this has been also very effective in some places, and this is the reason why we should continue asserting their legitimacy. So aside from that, they're put in a defensive position. Instead of being able to do their work, climate action, they're taking so much time asserting that they are not terrorists, they have to clear their names in courts, go to all these hearings. We are actually with the presence of indigenous people from the Philippines who were designated, whose members were designated as terrorists. So because of that, they can't go back to the communities, they can't go back to their homes, and they can't continue their work. And it's like adding insult to injury. There are climate vulnerable communities already bearing the brunt of climate change, and then they're even vilified, and because of that, they're arrested or killed. So I think we should always ensure that we assert the participation of communities, and we should always say that no matter what our beliefs are, no matter what we stand for, we still have a space in this table, and we are very important to climate action, and we should be listened to by our governments. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah, for your testimony. I'm sure that we'll have in the room other testimony of attacks and vilifications, campaigns of vilification against defenders. In my mandate, I also receive every day testimonies from those defenders. Turning now to Alma from Mexico, you're a journalist. A very broad question. How can we ensure an active participation and meaningful civic participation in climate policy making?
Bueno, primero quiero agradecer el espacio a las organizadoras. Creo que es importante que se incluyan distintas voces y creo que traer traductores, traductoras es un gran esfuerzo y por eso quiero agradecer poder hablar en español. Para poder garantizar la participación ciudadana, más que quiero poner ejemplos, sobre todo un ejemplo muy importante que es el de mi comunidad, pero también mencionar que hay proyectos como el Plan de Acción y proyectos sobre asambleas climáticas, climas, que impulsa a que se garantice justamente el derecho a la participación ciudadana, pero también el acceso a la información y el derecho a poder tener asambleas inclusivas, que se haga justicia lingüística y que sean estrategias transformadoras de género. Y esto que hace Climas también lo realizamos en la Asamblea para la Defensa del Territorio y la construcción de planes de vida del pueblo Macehual, Totonacú y Mestizo, que se realiza en mi comunidad hace más de 10 años. Este proceso de asambleas se realizó en el 2009, cuando nos enteramos que se quería hacer un hotel justamente donde estaban los manantiales de nuestro pueblo que surtía a toda la comunidad. Esta información no se había llegado, ya había la concesión, sin embargo, ninguno de los habitantes conocíamos esta información. Por eso es importante que se tenga acceso a la información qué concesiones se están dando. A raíz de eso, ciudadanos de nuestro pueblo se juntaron con académicos y también con el gobierno municipal para crear un plan, una estrategia para que nosotros decidamos qué hacer con nuestro territorio. Así se creó el ordenamiento territorial integral de Cuetzalan, que ha sido el primer ordenamiento de México y ha sido impulsado desde la ciudadanía, ha sido desde los saberes indígenas, ha sido también con los saberes académicos y con el apoyo del gobierno. Lamentablemente, quisiéramos decir que todas las veces que el gobierno también ha criminalizado a los mismos defensores del territorio, no siempre hay apoyo, y una de las formas para garantizar el acceso a la participación es fundamental darle continuidad, porque lamentablemente desde la comunidad hemos realizado distintos proyectos para solucionar los problemas que nos afectan, principalmente el turismo extractivista, porque es algo que se está impulsando muchísimo, pero vemos el problema que nuestras abejas no tienen ya dónde alimentarse porque se ha estado urbanizando muchísimo. Y no hay leyes, aunque tenemos el ordenamiento territorial, muchas veces no se respeta, muchas veces se nos sigue ignorando. Por eso es importante que sigamos participando aquí. Quiero contarles que esta es la primera vez que yo estoy en una COP y para mí es una responsabilidad enorme con mi pueblo. Me siento muy emocionada, pero también me siento con un gran compromiso de poder llevar toda esta información y de poder tener en la agenda una tarea pendiente, que es tener acceso a la información en nuestras lenguas maternas, porque es un derecho que no se nos está garantizando y que es necesario que se siga reforzando. ¿Por qué? Porque todas las leyes están escritas en español, muchos informes sobre el cambio climático están en inglés y esta información no llega, no se traduce, no se comparte y muchas personas en mi comunidad no saben que existen estas conferencias. Entonces tenemos una tarea pendiente de cómo estamos informando, cómo estamos haciendo llegar la información a las comunidades, de qué forma, que no sea tan vertical, que sea horizontal, que sea inclusiva y el día de hoy la muestra de estar aquí sentados es una muestra de que estamos haciendo una inclusión. Quería ser muy breve y muchas gracias. Tazoka Martik Meak.
Thank you very much. Turning now to Mika for the last question of this round. Mika, the US has been at the forefront of a regressive trend where countries adopt legislation to curtail the right to protest around critical infrastructures. And this often includes specific references to oil and gas pipelines. And such laws started to be adopted in 2016 after the indigenous-led movement opposing the Dakota Access Pipeline, where you participated grow across the country. Could you speak more about this trend and how indigenous communities have experienced it? You have like 3-4 minutes.
Thank you. In my community, I'm from the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming near Yellowstone. And the state that I'm from dubs themselves the energy capital of the world. We extract more oil, gas, and coal per capita than anywhere else on the planet. And so I live pretty much in the belly of the beast. And because of that, a lot of even our elected officials and our tribal officials are beholden to polluters. And so that even in my community, there is a division behind people who want money and people who want to protect the land. I've been an activist my whole life, and that is kind of carrying that torch from my grandparents. So my grandparents were a part of the Red Power, the American Indian movement, and their actions were criminalized. People were murdered, people were imprisoned, and we can see that this is actually not a new trend of the criminalization of indigenous activists, but a continuation of that trend that has started since colonization. Oftentimes, we are the ones who are facing the brunt of these issues. Growing up in an area where our water is polluted, the groundwater is contaminated, the air is polluted, I felt as a young person, I was like, why is this happening? And they're like, this is just the way it is. And I'm like, well, why? And then trying to do things about it turned into, either me being silenced, me being arrested. I'm a water protector who's been fighting on the front lines at Standing Rock, Line 3, Line 5, the Tennessee Gas Pipeline, with ordinary people just like you, because we understand one thing. We cannot ensure the health and well-being for future generations if we don't take action. Oftentimes, Indigenous people are put in situations where we feel like we have no other choice. In all of these projects, me with hundreds of others have went to the public utility commissions. We've spoke to our so-called officials. We've signed petitions. We've done every single thing that our predecessors have taught us how to do, how to try to go against projects like this that are contaminating our areas, our homelands. And none of those things worked. It literally took people chaining themselves to machines, crawling into pipes. And those things are the only things that stop those projects from happening in our community. And when we did those things, we were labeled terrorists, miscreants, wrongdoers, even jihadists, American jihadists, when talking about the Dakota Access Pipeline. And there were mercenaries that were protecting the pipeline. These companies, these corporations can hire the police to protect them. When the police are supposed to be protecting the people, they're utilizing tear gas, pepper bullets. People are hurt. I've been personally hurt. I've been arrested 12 times trying to stop these projects from happening in my community. And it's because I think when your land is taken, when your resources are taken, you have everything taken from you, and you come from nothing, you have nothing to lose. And for me, to see this trend continue where, even I have been charged with felonies, I've went to jail, I'm willing to risk my livelihood, my freedom, because it's the right thing to do. And now, nowhere is safe in the world. Earlier this year, I was in Atlanta, where a fellow Indigenous land defender was trying to protect the Atlanta forest and was murdered, execution style. So, a place like America, who's supposed to protect and freedom of speech, who prides themselves on the right to protest, we're not even safe.
Thank you, Michael. We'll have plenty of time to respond to questions coming from the floor on your testimonies. We are very short in time now. I will continue with the second round of questions, asking you to be very brief, very short to the point, like 1-2 minutes to respond to the questions, so that we have plenty of time for the audience to also raise issues, ask questions. So starting with Xai, what can the international community do to help land defenders to protect the Amazon forest? A very broad question.
Então, primeiro, como eu falei, a gente não pode mais aceitar, nenhum país do mundo pode aceitar que a gente continue sendo morto, essa é a verdade, né? A minha mãe está aqui, também, eu também estou aqui, e nós somos ameaçadas, né? Dentro do nosso próprio território, somos ameaçadas de poder acontecer o que aconteceu também, né, com o nosso parente ali. Mas eu acho que é importante também dizer, né, o que a comunidade internacional pode fazer e o que a gente pode refletir é para onde esse ouro está indo, né, que é tirado dos nossos territórios, que leva a essa violência, para onde essa carne está indo. Dentro do território rural existem mais de 20 mil cabeças de gado que são vendidas na Europa, para a China, né? que são levadas também para os Estados Unidos para fazer banco de carro, né? Então, a comunidade internacional também tem que saber da sua responsabilidade sobre isso. E nos dá suporte também, né? A transformação, a mudança, a revolução vai vir dos nossos territórios. Então, se a gente quer mudança, a gente precisa que todos também entendam isso e se unam aos povos indígenas, se unam às comunidades tradicionais, às mulheres, para que juntos a gente possa superar isso. Obrigada.
Thank you, Sayu. Very sharp, to the point. Turning to Leah, what are for you the current initiative, but also recommendations, the most accurate recommendations to address the security to the risk that they're facing?
So I think one of the most important things that we are doing is to raise the awareness of local communities and their environmental rights. They're becoming afraid because they don't know that it is their right to speak out. It is their right to take action when their lands are being taken from them, when their communities are being polluted. So at the community level, I think that's one of the most important things to do. Then outside from that, it is also important to have visibility for their struggles. It's important for people to help them out, to get what's happening in their communities out. Because for example, in Asia, there are many authoritarian regimes where they cannot speak out for themselves. That's why it's always very helpful if the international community also presents this situation and asserts pressure to the government. And I think it is also something that Global Witness has been helpful, releasing these reports every year. It's a big help for us, showing that there is truth in what we are saying, that we are being attacked. And in many parts also, there have been policies that are being forwarded. For example, in Mongolia, there's the Human Rights Defenders Law. In the Philippines, we have the Human Rights Defenders Bill. And just recently, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, is trying to formulate an environmental rights framework. We, civil society, are trying to push this as like the Escazo Agreement, because we learned a lot from the experience of our fellow defenders. That, of course, we have little hope that it would look like what we want it to be, but then again, it is still an opportunity for us to have an agreement, a declaration, or whatever, to have additional protection for us environmental defenders. So I think maybe one important recommendation as well is that in these spaces where in the negotiations where our governments are tiptoeing around the issue of the killings, of the vilification, attacks on environmental defenders, we should help each other call them out, because we should not be the target. They should be the ones on the spot explaining why this is happening to us. And lastly, even if we're brought together by this terrible situation of environmental defenders and climate activists, we always should end engagements like this with hope. Hope that the people here, fellow panelists, everyone in the audience, people who are not here but have interest for the defenders, this means that there is hope for us to continue, because it's up to us to help the people who are not with us, the people who are in the communities that are most vulnerable to climate change and most vulnerable to attacks. And I think it's our unity that is our strength. So I think one of the most important recommendations is to exhaust all efforts and think about ways to continue protecting environmental defenders so they can participate in climate action.
Thank you so much, Leah. Turning now to Alma from Mexico, as a journalist, we heard a strong statement by Mika, defenders being called terrorists or Taliban or green khmers. Now, how the media could protect or would harm land and defenders, and is there anything you see that the media could do to improve the protection of defenders?
Quiero comenzar compartiendo unos datos de mi país. En 2020 se registraron 197 eventos de agresión en los que se atentó la vida, la integridad personal y las formas de vida de los defensores del territorio. De estos eventos fueron 582 agresiones diversas en las que sobresale la intimidación, el hostigamiento, amenazas, agresiones físicas y daños de propiedad. Este informe es el informe sobre la situación de las personas y comunidades defensoras Informe sobre la situación de las personas y comunidades defensoras de los derechos humanos ambientales en México 2022 del Centro Mexicano de Derecho Ambiental. El año pasado, 24 personas defensoras fueron asesinadas por defender su tierra y su territorio. El 2022 fue el tercer año más letal detrás del 2017. Quiero compartir estos datos porque es importante contextualizar y saber lo que está pasando en mi país. Porque el papel de los medios de comunicación es fundamental para que las narrativas cambien. Anteriormente en mi país había un solo medio de comunicación masivo que llevaba la información a todo México. Lamentablemente, esa comunicación revictimizaba, desinformaba y atentaba contra los pueblos indígenas y muchas veces ni siquiera se mencionaba lo que estaba pasando en las comunidades. Se invisibilizaba totalmente lo que pasaba. Afortunadamente, hoy podemos decir que existen comunicadores indígenas, narradores y narradoras y periodistas que van poco a poco haciendo periodismo más inclusivo, periodismo intercultural y también periodismo de soluciones, porque no solamente visibilizan lo que está pasando, los problemas ambientales, sino también están haciendo periodismo de soluciones, que es visibilizar lo que están haciendo. Están contando historias que nadie está contando, están yendo a territorios a los que nadie ha ido. Y eso es importante y se debe de reconocer que ahora hay medios que están haciendo lo que no se había hecho. Los medios locales, principalmente como las radios comunitarias, han sido un papel fundamental para que los derechos de los defensores del territorio sean visibilizados, para que se sigan conservando los saberes y las tradiciones de los pueblos. Yo soy cofundadora de un proyecto que se llama Yolcuali Comunicación y justamente buscamos eso, seguir dialogando por la defensa del territorio en la actual crisis climática. Buscamos que sea un espacio también de formación para que las juventudes nos sigamos formando para seguir comunicando y crear nuevas narrativas. Narrativas que nos visibilicen y nos dejen de ver como víctimas y nos vean como lo que somos, que los pueblos indígenas somos la solución a la crisis climática. Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alma. Last speaker, Mika, with a tough question. We see that, and we heard from you, that repression and violence against indigenous and defenders continue to grow in the US. What would be your call to the Biden administration at this COP, in short?
So, here at the World Forum, there's a lot of window dressing that goes on, especially with my government. They like to tout that there's bills, the largest climate bill in the history of the world, all while not mentioning that that same exact bill puts 95% of public lands out for oil and gas leases to make the money for oil and gas. You cannot keep funding the problem and then putting pennies on a dollar for the solution. What we've seen, even with the loss and damage fund, where there's this great victory of the COP28, my country offered pennies, 17 million. They put more at war than they've put actually in trying to fund the things for our people. And the US military is the largest polluter, and that is not even accounted in these negotiations. The world's largest polluter. And, you know, when talking about silencing people, water protectors, land defenders, indigenous people, this doesn't just happen in the countries, our countries, this even happens here in this space. Last year, my country's negotiation team asked for indigenous people's safeguards and rights to be removed from Article 6, which talks about carbon markets. As a group of us, indigenous people, protested our so-called leaders when they went to the international stage to say that indigenous people are a solution to climate change, all while his administration showed the exact opposite, we were targeted. Our badges were taken, our status was suspended from this space. I wasn't even allowed in until a couple days ago. So when we're talking about the silencing that happens here, in national levels, we have to address that it happens here within the UN, and we need to create procedures that protect us as indigenous people to speak our minds in this space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mika. We are now going to open the discussion with the audience, but before that, and coming back to what Shruti was saying on the increasing number of killings of defenders, we heard just before the start of this meeting a very worrying news coming from Peru, where one defender, Quinto Inuma Alvado, was killed, was shot 3 times in the back, and 1 shot in the head, and had met Quinto a couple of months ago when I did my official visit to Peru, and it's not only worrying but also moving to see that defenders are killed. They are human beings, and sometimes it hurts to hear testimonies of those killings of people that you have engaged with at the UN. And we have decided to give the floor to Miguel Vasquez from Peru, one of these friends, to some very brief words of presentation of the situation in Peru. Not too long, Miguel.
Buenas noches, ¿cómo están? Gracias, Michel. A Michel lo conocí en Ginebra cuando hicimos un viaje a Quinto, que es un amigo mío, un luchador indígena. Para mí es una situación complicada. Cuando venía a la COP el día 29, 2 de la tarde, fue asesinado un amigo de lucha con quien tuve varias conversaciones de cómo en nuestra Amazonía, en Perú, los líderes, lideresas, defensores y defensoras son asesinados. Tenemos más de 30 líderes asesinados en la Amazonía desde el 2014, todos ellos haciendo denuncias respectivas más de 2 años. Chota buscaba su reconocimiento de su territorio ancestral más de 20 años, titulación jurídica de sus territorios. Albilo Meléndez, 5 años buscando titulación de su territorio ancestral. Todos los líderes asesinados tienen ese elemento importante, buscando justicia para sus pueblos. Yo creo que es hora de parar esta situación, porque no podemos permitir esta situación en el mundo. Por eso nosotros, como líderes, defensores y defensoras, rechazamos todo acto de violencia contra los defensores y defensoras en el mundo. Quinto ha sido asesinado. En un mes conversaba yo y me decía, me van a matar, ¿qué va a pasar con mi familia? Ya hice todo lo que tenía que hacer, denuncias a nivel regional, nacional, internacional, pero no se ha avanzado nada respecto a la situación crítica que estamos enfrentando los líderes, lideresas, defensores y defensoras. En el mundo, todas las personas que contribuyen a hacer algo positivo para el mundo tienen premios, los cantantes, todo lo que pueda haber. Los líderes también indígenas, defensores de derechos humanos, de los bosques, de los territorios, también nos premian. ¿Y cuál es nuestro premio? El asesinato. Es el premio por defender nuestros bosques, nuestros territorios, que también no son solo para los pueblos indígenas, sino para el mundo. Pero esa labor que nosotros estamos haciendo en nuestros territorios no son reconocidos. O nos reconocen de una manera muy lamentable. Quinto ya no está con nosotros, buscaba justicia para su comunidad, para su territorio. La única forma de callar su voz de Quinto ha sido asesinar. Una violación sistemática en el país que día a día se vive. Yo he sido asesinado, yo he sido amenazado muchas veces. Y cuando hay un descuido, ya no estás. Eso pasó con Quinto. Quinto había sido muchas veces amenazado de muerte, pero un día se descuidaron, ya no está. Resumir todo lo que nos ha pasado sería un poco más de tiempo, pero para mí es triste mencionar esto, porque también, igual que los compañeros que han mencionado su vida, también lo vivimos los líderes y lideresas amazónicos, indígenas. Nuestro único objetivo es defender la tierra, defender la Amazonía para el mundo, pero no están reconociendo ese labor que estamos haciendo día a día. Muchas gracias y muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Miguel. 3 bullets in the back and 1 bullet in the head that they pay to price, the price that they pay for defending the land and environment. Thank you so much, Miguel. We are now moving to the second part of the discussion with the audience, and we'll have a microphone circulating in the room for those who want to take the floor. Be sharp, be short, be to the point, and direct your questions not only to me, but also to one of the panelists, and indicate to which you are sending your questions. I don't see very well the audience, so we are here. Yes, very short, 1 minute, not more.
Sim, serei breve. Tentarei. A minha pergunta é para o Mica, mas também quero aproveitar para dizer que na questão de defensores e defensoras no Brasil, o que é necessário é que o Brasil ratifique o acordo de Escazú. É super importante para a gente que daqui saia algo cobrando do governo brasileiro a ratificação do acordo. E para o Mica, é dizer parabéns, Mica. Eu estive na sua terra numa manifestação de vocês contra o gasoduto e quero aprender muito com vocês como a gente pode fazer quando o nosso governo está querendo fazer plataforma de petróleo no Amapá que vai afetar os povos indígenas do Brasil. E dizer que nós estamos contigo.
Thank you. It is my pleasure now to give the floor to Isabel Albarejo. She's the head of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Honduras, and she also has plenty of testimonies on what's happening to defenders in Honduras and elsewhere in Latin America. Very, very brief, very short remarks.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I mean, your interventions have been so inspirational. Thank you so much for that. But your interventions also show the contrast between the declared political will by many states to advance climate action and the lack of effective protection and continued attack against those who defend environment, climate justice, land and territory and indigenous people. And one example is the COP, where your voices have not been heard at the high-level segment, for example, that you've had just limited access to those who make decisions at the highest level. Since the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015, at least 1,319 defenders have been killed around the world. Only in 2022, 176 lost their lives just for defending land and the environment, and the vast majority of them, 88% of them, were in Latin America, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and Honduras. And more than 1/3 were indigenous people. Apart from killings, as you've said, environmental human rights defenders have to face different kind of attacks that go from the use of criminal law against their activities and evictions, threats, and a lot of attacks. And even the adoption of the resolution by the General Assembly of the right to a healthy and clean environment was an important milestone that has inspired certain legislations. There are still a lot to do. For example, in Africa, only 5 countries have law to protect human rights defenders, environmental defenders. And in Latin America, there are 5 countries that have national protection mechanisms for environmental defenders, for human rights defenders in general. So that shows that there is a lot to do according to institutional and legal reforms at the domestic level in order to protect those who protect the land and the environment. That means investigate crimes, the fight against impunity for crimes against human rights and environmental defenders. The impunity is one of the main factors that create the attacks. And of course, it's very important to recognize at the national and international level the important labor of the environmental human rights defenders. And that starts by just recognizing it in the global stocktake outcome here and that also means, as the last intervention showed, that it's not only a human rights-based approach, it's not just only recognizing the important voice of the environmental human rights defenders, but also to adopt, for example, a human rights-based approach to climate finance. For example, what that means, that wealthy states are responsible for the massive emissions, so wealthy states have also to compensate for loss and damages created in those countries who have the main problems. And I just want to finish with a very good news, because I think there is also time for hope. There is time for hope. As you know, in Honduras, for example, environmental human rights defender Berta Cáceres was killed just some months after she received the Goldman Prize. Yesterday, the intellectual responsible for her killing was captured. And that shows that there's still hope for the impunity to finish and for the environmental human rights defenders to be heard at international and national level. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isabel. And indeed, Berta Cáceres was killed in Honduras the day before I presented my report to the UN on environmental defenders. What a signal. Now we have 10-15 minutes to give the floor to the audience. So we had already one question. I guess everyone here? Yes?
Thank you so much. My name is Salam. I'm a climate justice activist from Denmark. And I'd firstly like to share the European experience, because it's so far away from what we're hearing here. The stuff that we're fearing and that we're experiencing is that it's becoming more and more illegal, that the narrative about climate activism is changing towards we being called eco-terrorists or being jailed for 3 years. I haven't personally experienced that, but that's ones in the UK and other places in Europe have experienced being jailed for peacefully protesting. So that is the European context of it, which is so far away from people being killed. So I guess my question here is, before I ask my question, also the way that it's shaping and going, the way we're going in Europe is it's going against this narrative against climate activism, that we're some sort of eco-terrorists or something. So my question here is, in what way do people like us, the ones that aren't as much at risk as people from the global south and stuff, in what way can we best stand in solidarity with you guys?
Thank you. I take two more questions. Yes?
Boa tarde, meu nome é Camila Gomes, eu sou de uma organização brasileira chamada Terra de Direitos e a minha pergunta é para todos da mesa, para todas, sobre as experiências de produção de dados sobre violência contra defensores. A gente, junto com uma organização parceira chamada Justiça Global, a Terra de Direitos e a Justiça Global, lançaram recentemente um compilado, assim, um levantamento sobre os casos de violência durante o governo Bolsonaro, violência contra defensores e defensoras. E esse estudo mostra que 80% dos casos de violência foram feitos no contexto de luta por terra, território e meio ambiente. Né? Então, isso daqui tem nos ajudado a afirmar o óbvio nos espaços, né? De que essa luta está intrinsecamente ligada ao risco. Então, queria saber se vocês têm experiências que a gente possa compartilhar sobre produção de dados.
Thank you, thank you. I give the floor now to the other side of the room. Up to you to decide, huh? Very brief, huh? Very short.
Thank you very much, Borghild Jonathan Krogan from Rainforest Foundation in Norway, and thank you so much for your important intervention, not least from Peru as well. My question is, in light of the Escazú Agreement and the Aarhus Convention, what are the prospects of having a global treaty to ensure that environmental defenders can get access to information, protection, and participation and justice in environmental matters? Thank you.
Thank you. Last question. Yes, in the back. Here.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Alan, a lawyer from Natural Justice. My question is to the broad panel. How do we as civil society and partners of land and environmental defenders advocate for an alternative model to development, one that doesn't look at the plundering of resources and extractivism, but one that looks at ecological integrity and just stewarding the betterment of the environment?
Thank you. Maybe your last one on the back of the room here. Yeah?
My name is Wali. I represent the Global People's Caravan for Food, Land and Climate Justice. The other day I was in a leaders forum. I was hearing your president and your environmental minister. They were mentioning that how they are using forests for prosperity of Brazilian people. And now yet again I am hearing how they are suppressive and repressive. In our this morning my Prime Minister was also speaking. So all these leaders are speaking lies in front of us, and yet again we can't do anything in this kind of a forum. So it's quite encouraging and strengthening to see these grassroots voices, and a need for a paradigm narrative shifts is very important, because this false solution of carbon trading been very much propagated by Lula and his environmental minister. The narrative change to the people's voices need to be strengthened through this kind of a forum and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm turning now to the panelists. Who wants to take the floor? And again, I know it's complicated to respond to all questions, so I would ask you to be very brief and to maybe to make some final remarks. And if time permits, we'll have a second round of discussion. So who wants to start? Mika, do you want to try?
I think I remember hearing a question from you.
That's why I turned to you.
And you were talking about like what the Brazilian government can help with when taking on to COP20 or COP30, correct? And I think indigenous people, we need our own office inside this COP space that deals with our issues, and that we can have a liaison, because essentially there's a civil society liaison, and I think that there are certain things that we need in this space that aren't allowed. You know, we can't smudge where we want to, we can't clean off with medicines, we can't use our drums or our instruments, or it's considered a protest anywhere except, you know, special designated areas. And there are metaphysical beings at war in this space. When a country's fighting a country, and there are things that we need to do to protect our spirit in here. So I think that those are certain things that I can see that I hope that the Brazilian government can bring when having COP there in Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Leah, you want also to say a few words?
Me?
Yeah?
Sorry.
Or-
Okay, so for the question on how can the Global North activists help, and also related to like how civil society in general can help, I think one of the most practical ways is that you can raise to the our issues with companies that are based in your countries, because most of the companies operating in our countries are transnational or multinational corporations that are based in developing countries. And from what we know, they have more strict human rights policies. You have the Aarhus Convention, you have a developing EU mandatory due diligence, and other kinds of policies like the OECD guidelines and other kinds of policies. You can, companies are more scared when it's their citizens that are speaking up against them. And I think that's the most concrete way to show solidarity. And with the question of how can you help or experience in the production of data, there are many organizations already asking us for data, and sometimes we feel like we are just sources of information instead of really partners and people. So I think genuine partnership, continuing partnership, and not just, providing what we have and then leaving us after. I think that's what we need. And I think also what we can do, as Wally mentioned, when our governments are speaking nice in intergovernmental spaces, but it's not the actual thing that's happening, we should expose it. We should definitely expose it and not be afraid. We have media here at COP, a lot of them. We have side events, we have other spaces, actions. We should not be afraid to speak out. Even us in the Philippines, that is our experience. So we should not succumb to their intimidation. I think that's the most important thing we should do.
Thank you, Leah. We'll not be afraid. Alma, 1 minute, and then Xai for the last word. Very short, very brief. We are short in time.
Respecto a la recopilación de datos, en la comunidad cuando se intentó por parte de una empresa hacer una subestación eléctrica, hubo hostigamiento. Y creo que si no hubiera sido por organizaciones internacionales, no se hubiera dado a conocer que la comunidad se estaba hostigando, que se estaban haciendo campañas de desprestigio en contra de los defensores del territorio. Y creo que es muy importante aliarse con estas organizaciones, pero también es un problema muy difícil poder contabilizar cuántos hostigamientos hay, porque realmente han sido muchos, pero los más visibles sí se han podido contabilizar en las comunidades, y tomando en cuenta que por lo menos en mi municipio, que es un municipio muy pequeño, que está alejado de a 6 horas de la cabecera, de la capital, realmente es muy difícil transportarse para ir a hacer una denuncia, y las autoridades municipales no están preparadas para eso. Entonces creo que es un gran reto y era una muy buena pregunta, y seguimos como intentando, haciendo eso. Gracias.
Thank you. Xai, sorry, you have only 1 minute to express yourself.
Então, vou tentar responder bem rapidamente a sua pergunta, né? A verdade é que, é claro que nós temos uma nova perspectiva de governo, né? Com o governo Lula, com o governo Bolsonaro, nós vivemos 4 anos de grandes ataques aos povos indígenas, mas também é verdade que nós tivemos, né, uma promessa do governo brasileiro da demarcação dos nossos territórios e que está paralisado, né? Então, nós, como sociedade civil, como povos indígenas, né, não vamos deixar de cobrar o governo brasileiro, independente de quem seja, pela demarcação dos nossos territórios, né? Pela nossa segurança das nossas vidas. Nós ainda assim estamos sendo ameaçados, né? Porque existem ainda muitas pessoas que cobiçam os nossos territórios, e elas estão no Congresso Nacional, né? E então a gente precisa continuar cobrando, porque, enfim, a gente sabe que muitas vezes a gente tem um Congresso muito mais conservador agora do que no governo passado, né? E então é isso, a gente também está aqui para continuar cobrando, e como você disse, sem medo, né? A gente não pode ter medo de dizer, né, aquilo que também está nos afligindo. Sem a demarcação dos nossos territórios, não existe justiça climática.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sai. And that concludes our panel discussion, interactive dialogue with the audience. And I would like to give now the floor to our last speaker, Tawanga Shihana. She is the coordinator of the African Environment Defenders Initiative and Natural Justice. She's working across Africa to develop strategies of advocacy. You have the floor for the concluding remark. You please come to the podium.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored this evening to make a few closing remarks and express gratitude to all those who made this event a reality. First and foremost, on behalf of all the NGOs that collaborated on this side event, I would like to express my appreciation to our distinguished moderator, Michelle Forst, our speakers and panelists for their valuable contributions to our side event this evening. Our deepest gratitude also goes out to all of you who've attended our side event. You have helped make it a successful event, and we thank you. In this side event today, we have listened to inspiring stories from our brave land and environmental defenders and explored some critical issues that call on each and every one of us to contribute to a significant discussion on the situation of land and environmental defenders. It is worth mentioning that land and environmental defenders on the front line of the climate crisis are not policymakers or government technocrats. They are farmers, students, grandmothers, widows, struggling mothers, community leaders who are committed to protecting their ancestral land, traditional knowledge, and sources of livelihood, and exercising their human right to a clean and healthy environment. Albeit ordinary men and women, the critical role of land and environmental defenders cannot be overstated. Land and environmental defenders are often stewards of the natural environment with a deep attachment and understanding of their ecosystems. Indigenous peoples that have lived in harmony with nature for thousands of years. They understand the impacts of the changing climate on ecosystems and use their traditional knowledge, values, and practices to sustainably manage and use natural resources and protect the natural environment from destruction. According to UNEP, there are over 476 million indigenous people living in 90 countries across the globe. Together, they own, manage, and occupy about 1/4 of the world's land, a territory that has fared far much better than the rest of the world. However, even in the face of all these glaring facts, underscoring the contribution and critical role of land and environmental defenders in climate adaptation, they are currently the most targeted group of human rights defenders. Over the last few years, a lot of progress has been made at both global and regional level to recognize and protect environmental defenders, such as the Paris Agreement, the HRC Resolution 4011, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the Aarhus Convention, the Escazú Agreement, the UN Resolution for the Right to a Clean and Healthy Environment, just to mention a few. And a growing number of states have ratified the right to a clean and healthy environment into their national legislation, 156 out of 193 member states to be exact. Despite all these efforts, there is still an alarming increase in attacks against land and environmental defenders. According to Global Witness, and we've already heard from them, there have been an average of 4 defenders killed every week since the signing of the Paris Agreement in 2016. As a joint collective of NGOs, we are saying it is not enough to enact laws or include language that recognizes and protects environmental defenders. Our legal instruments and frameworks must be turned into tangible action. We need to rethink our business as usual approach to the protection and recognition of land and environmental defenders. And this is why we have convened this side event today, to shed more light on some of the actions we feel could potentially move the needle from policy to action. It is not an exhaustive list. There is still a lot that can be done to promote greater recognition and promotion for environmental defenders. The key demands are up there. I am not going to go into them because of time. But before I end my closing remarks, I would like to convey a special thanks to the interpreters, an additional special thank you to the organizations that have contributed to the policy brief, and the 150 organizations that have endorsed our policy brief. Last but not least, a huge thank you to the organizers of this event. Thank you for your priceless contributions and for running a smooth event. I wish you a lovely evening and a fruitful COP28. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I guess our panelists deserve also a round of applause, including Shruti. So thank you so much. Don't give up.